What motivated you to choose the life of living aboard a sailboat and your sustainable lifestyle? Just a personal add-on from myself. Did you yourself, Dmitry, suffer any fear when you made these big decisions before going forth?
I don't consider myself an especially brave person. I think I became more brave as a result of all this. I think I was nervous to begin with, but the experience of living aboard a boat and sailing it around and having it break down a lot initially because I bought a fairly abused older boat and it took me a couple of years to get it shipshape. But during that time, there were harrowing episodes and those were actually growing experiences for me because now I'm not really afraid of much. Maybe that's bad. Maybe that makes me more dangerous or something.
No, it doesn't. I'm sorry to interrupt. No, it doesn't. You expand your comfort zone, and it never returns to its source of original size. And ditto. I mean, kudos to you for it. I've been 35 years now living that way, and people still tell me it can't be done. So I just finally agree with them.
Well, I think that people live in sheltered circumstances doing the same thing day in and day out and basically pleasing others and doing things other people expect them to do. And it's very difficult to break out of that mindset and that mold. So, but if once you start taking steps in that direction, each step becomes easier and easier. So now I can entertain radical notions of doing things that would cause most other people to hyperventilate. Mm-hmm. But my nerves are barely twitching because I've done this sort of thing before. I kind of know how it goes. I know what to watch out for.
This is what we're trying to get through on a lot of the, what is deemed, I believe you call it fence post sitters. They really want to do something, but they bow into their fear. And this is the point, one of the points we're trying to get across by interviewing people with experience like yourself. This next question comes from another subscriber, Stan. Switching gears for a moment, I'd like to ask you about your phrase, permanent crisis. Potential economic, political, and ecological declines leading to an eventual collapse of America. Would you care to expand on this so our listeners might gain a better grasp of what's presently taking hold in America?
Well, it's very hard to generalize to such a huge extent, but basically what's happening in the country is this very radical effort to ignore the truth. The numbers, the statistics are no longer anything that can be relied on for any sort of information, for any sort of guidance. It's all very much faked. In terms of how the legal system is supposed to operate, it no longer operates that way. You no longer have the rights that you thought you had. In terms of what sort of planning you're expected to do, there's still retirement planners and estate planners and various types of financial consultants. That's all very much fakey fake too, because what are they basing their projections on? Fake government numbers. So these are all basically sort of theatrical measures along the lines of what's called suspension of disbelief. In theater, basically the actors are doing something that isn't real. It's not, what's happening on stage is not real life. But the audience has paid for a ticket on the presupposition that they'll sit there and pretend that it's real life and react to it emotionally as if it's real life. And this is the trap in which most Americans right now are caught, is that because they've bought into the system, they're compelled to behave as if what's going on is still real, even though it isn't.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Dmitry, I want to ask a question now. In reading some of your material, I'd like to know if you still feel the end game for America will come from huge military budgets, even though that has declined over the past couple of years, government deficits, a totally unresponsive political system to today's current problems, and what's recently come to play, declining oil prices, or has the path changed over the last while?
Oh, I don't think it's changed at all. I think the country is basically technically bankrupt and is basically trying to suck whatever blood there remains in all of these countries that they've managed to manipulate and control. And lately what the U.S. is doing to prolong its agony is basically to undermine countries around the world, so that people become afraid and thinking that the United States is the most stable place in the world. I'm not sure why. They sent their money to the United States, or they buy real estate there, or they try to get an American passport. That's working to some extent, but it's basically, you're basically, eating through the planet. And once there's nothing left to eat through, then that's the end of the game. But overall, if you look at the, the fiscal picture of the United States, it only raises 2/3 of the money that it spends. 1/3 of the money is basically borrowed or printed into existence. And that's not a sustainable pattern at all. Now, the interesting thing about the United States is that, it is so big and so powerful that it can't just fail a little bit. Like Zimbabwe could fail for a really long time in ways big and small. Ukraine has been, circling the drain for a year now, and will probably circle the drain for maybe another year before the actual final breakdown comes. But the United States will just crash, and that won't take more than a couple of days, I would think.
Really? Interesting. I do have one or two questions down the road on the interview about that. Now, I'm looking forward for you to expand on that. But you did mention a moment ago financial advisors. Just a brief sidebar. I'd like to give you a definition that I came up with on what is a financial advisor. And a financial advisor is an expert who will know tomorrow why the things he predicted yesterday didn't happen today. And that's about the extent of it, because everything right now is a crapshoot. And you have to believe in real things and your ability to be able to kind of relook the world over and kind of get together with people again, because I don't think anybody's going to do very well on their own in the near future.
Well, yes, it's very important to have a network of, friends and people you can work with. It's supposed to be this rule of business that I keep hearing about, where, you don't really want to go into business with friends and family. For some reason, I've just heard this over and over again. All sorts of rationales are offered for that sort of thing. It's unprofessional to just, work with your friends and family. But that's kind of all I've ever done. Mm-hmm. And whenever I didn't, things worked out a lot worse. In some cases, I started working with people I didn't know, but they eventually became friends and or family as a result of me working with them. That's kind of the best case scenario. But it seems like working with strangers is a really bad idea. Doing anything with strangers is a bad idea.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting point of view, but obviously you do not retain the most costliest thing you're going to own, and that's a closed mind, or you wouldn't be living the way you're living now. You've learned to, obviously, friends, family, but you have picked in strangers, and over time you dig through the dirt to get to the gold like anybody. Isn't that true? Well,
yes. There accidents throw people together, and one of the things to watch out, and take advantage of is, the formative experience, the productive crisis that throws people together in new combinations. And that's the best thing that can possibly happen to the world. In your book, Reinventing Collapse, Dmitry, which was published in 2008, you mentioned the term superpower collapse suit. Common to both nations, the U.S. and Russia would share the suffering caused by a shortfall in the production of crude, a worsening foreign trade deficit, oversized military budgets, and toxic foreign debt. However, you continue to mention that the Soviet Union hit what is called a soft crash, but you believe the U.S. will suffer from a hard crash, mirroring Germany's Weimar Republic of the 1920s. Could you please explain why you feel this way? Well, basically, the entire living arrangement in the Soviet Union was not financialized at all, and was not mediated by any market structure. It was basically geared to physical delivery of various products, so that the economy could completely fall apart, and yet coal was still dug out of the ground and delivered to power plants. The industrial farming economy still produced quite a lot of food, which got distributed not through some market mechanism, but through an allocation scheme. People didn't have to pay rent because they lived in government housing. They didn't have to pay for health care because that was provided by the government. They didn't have to pay for education. So basically, money could become scarce, non-existent, or hyperinflate to a point where it was completely worthless, and yet things continued to run. That was the inadvertent collapse preparedness of the Soviet Union. Nothing like that exists in the United States. Everything is just in time. Everything is very highly financialized. Everything is mediated by these markets, which are now electronically controlled and can crash and basically disappear in a split second. And so when collapse comes to the United States, I think it's going to be this instantaneous rolling collapse, which will travel throughout the entire economy at the speed of the internet.
What negative effects do you see occurring to the high percentage of citizens currently living in Western nations who just refuse to take this seriously? And that's a high percentage.
Well, what do people do when the lights go out, there's no water coming out of the faucet, the toilet won't flush, the garbage isn't getting removed, you can't buy gasoline at a gas station, public transportation doesn't run, and government offices are all closed? Okay, what's your plan of action? You live in a high-rise apartment, say a 15th story, walk up and the elevators don't run.
I agree.
So after that, it's sort of like, pack a backpack and hike out of the city along with everyone else. Of course, there'll be some ornery locals you'll encounter on the way, but it's better than staying in place.
A dear friend of the family is one of the foremost psychologists out of Canada. I'll leave her name out of it, but she did explain to us that there are two emotions that human beings crave stronger than love, and one of them is denial. The other one is a sense of belonging, which would explain why you could, for example, have a TV evangelist draw 300,000 into a stadium, and there's many doctors, lawyers. These are not uneducated people, but they're not looking for what they're preaching. They're looking for a sense of belonging. And the second one is denial. And I'm really starting to believe she's correct on that, because the more you probe to try to help, it's like the further you separate. You can tell somebody there's 5 billion stars in the universe, they'll believe you. But if you tell them that chair has wet paint, they have to touch it when you're not looking. I don't understand that philosophy, but evidently you're explaining it. What do you do, right?
Well, if it's all about faith, right? So if you're going to have faith, and most people need some modicum of faith, everybody, even the absolutely most convinced atheist, prays when their life is in mortal danger. That's a known phenomenon. But if you're going to have faith, then you might as well believe in a wrathful God who is unpredictable and quick to anger. And what you don't want to believe in is a God who is all loving and all forgiving, and furthermore believes in progress and peace and free cookies for everyone. That's just the wrong kind of deity to believe in, given the quality of the world in which we live.
Mm-hmm. It's been my personal experience that nobody talks more about God than an atheist, but we'll move on to the next question.
Okay.
What advice could you offer the folks living in Western nations that might assist them in getting their plans in order and getting the fence post sitters and their family on board?
Well, one thing that seems to help people a lot is going off and going on a long trip through Russia. For a lot of them, that seems to be kind of like a life-changing or formative experience, because, Western Europe is all these tiny little countries, right? And you don't really get a sense of space from them. And when you cross the Russian border, suddenly you're exposed to the rest of the Eurasian continent, which is 11 time zones wide, whereas Europe is, 3? And so, that really opens their eyes. They basically realize that the world is a huge place, and they also understand the value of survival and the value of living among people who have finely honed survival instincts because they've had them for 1,000 years, which is why they're still living where they're living. And they come back absolutely changed and transformed, some of them, and remember this trip for the rest of their lives. So that would be my advice to Western Europeans is go take a trip through Russia.
Dmitry, any last comments you'd care to make? And what's the best way our drescapes subscribers can stay in touch with you?
Well, they can just email me directly, and my email is on my blog. My blog is cluborlov, orlov.blogspot.com. You know, it's a very lively blog. The comment sections are sparsely used, but I deal with a lot of people just directly via email. So if somebody wants to email me directly, I assure you I'm very approachable and I do respond.
Wonderful. I'd like to mention in closing that there's no one size fits all when it comes to best preparing for what lies ahead. For my family and a growing number of others, expatriating to where food and water is plentiful, surrounded in a climate that never freezes, makes a lot of sense. For Dmitry and his family, it's living aboard a sailboat, being well-equipped and enjoying the advantage of instant mobility should trouble break out. Yet for others, it may be best to hunker down and hope for the best. Just don't procrastinate. Denial's blissful until reality comes calling. I want to take a personal moment and thank you, Dmitry, for spending your time with us. You're absolutely, because of your experience, I'm sure you can appreciate, you retain a wealth of knowledge that few have, and gained from living your experiences. To me, this was a very special moment to talk with you. Have a wonderful holiday season, and as I always say in closing, best adventures, sir.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you very much.